Okay, let's get straight into it. So we've got donuts are really good. Going for realism, need feedback on lighting specifically. Full disclosure, I did not model the assets. Okay, so we won't talk about the models. Yeah, so first things first, what I would do is actually make the... I'm just going to paste it in here. Sorry, let me just get this going. I'd make it a bit lighter first. So just brightening it up just that little bit more so we can see a bit more of the details. Second thing is I would use a second light probably down a little bit more as if like the reflection on the ground, just a tad, just to hit up the bottom sections here. I'd probably also pull the camera back so we can see a bit more of the car rather than cutting off the bottom section here. And I do like your use of bloom and your use of the HDRI, but yeah, probably just if you're going to present this model, thinking about how you're putting the lights to make sure that it's seen well, and also the areas that are darker still have a bit of detail. I'd also look into the color of your lights too, just to make sure that they hit the right colors from the sky, and also trying to think about your camera angle too, to try and really present the model with showing its best features. And so that can be looking into depth of field, which you have done a little bit, but also field of view to make sure that it doesn't warp or look like you're not too crushed as well. And then also composing it in the picture to try and really show off its curves or its main features like its reflections and shininess. Hopefully that helps and gives you some direction for the future. Okay, and then we've got iPickle Juiceal, or something like that. Under Mars, surface, trying procedural, not good yet. Everything but the astronauts are made using the brick texture, even the lights on the ball. Okay, so let's open it up. So I would just say that the composition is a little bit too tight around, say, this person's foot and the top of this ball here. I'd just bring the camera back just a tad, and then maybe cutting off the edges once you've brought it back just a little bit more, so it becomes a little bit more rounded in the sense of having space around the edges of the things. We want just a little bit more room. I would also consider adding possibly a bit more reflection on the ground so we can see a bit more of these people standing here. Maybe just something to explore. I do like your use of bloom. Consider also the use of a HDRI map to capture some more interesting reflections around. And I like the use of color in your lights. Also consider with these colored lights here that they have a little bit of color too. Possibly also consider the use of like God rays or sunbeams to come down and show the dimension of this light coming down from the roof, which I'm guessing they come out from a helicopter. Just something to consider with your future projects, just to help show the meaning and stuff of this. This sort of section here, it's not really clear why it's there. Like if that was removed, I could probably think that this might be a spaceship or some sort of alien creature or them on a planet. But at the moment, this and its resolution, it sort of becomes a bit distracting and is taking away from the story of this piece. I do like it though. Like I think that looking into the colors that you use, especially in the lights on the ground and stuff like that, as well as looking into HDRI and the composition, could really add to this piece overall and make it look much more refined. Yeah, hopefully that helps give you some direction. Now we've got Dunder Slants, trying to go for a moody vibe. Any lighting and or modeling suggestions? Okay, so the first thing would be I'd actually just crop off these extra areas on the side here. Maybe change the background to be like a more interesting color, still like a less saturated color, but probably not just a pure grey. I would also consider the use of a HDRI, especially if you have reflective materials around in the scene, just to help capture some extra details in there. I do like your reflection, like the lights and stuff on here, but also choose to use some bloom to get some shine going on. And I would also look into the use of a bevel to smooth out some of these harsher corners here, as well as maybe just a bit more of a brightness in the scene. So I'm going to bring it over into GIMP, and I might just crop it while I'm here, just so it's a little bit tighter. And then I'm going to up the brightness just slightly, just so I can see it a bit more. So it could possibly be good to add a secondary light somewhere in the scene, or just a general, like, more ambient light to light up some of these like really black areas here. Also possibly go in with some more details on the keyboard if you feel like it, just like adding a spacebar, the D-pad, and the numpad keys, as well as adding the cables in for the monitors and the mouse, and possibly some more details on the actual like computer itself, adding in some more creases to the top of the bed and to the pillow could really add to it, and maybe adding some paintings or posters up on the wall, maybe a little mirror or a window. And definitely adding some bevels in, definitely lighting this area up a bit more, maybe even having some stuff on the top here, some stuff on the ground, like a little bin, or bits of clothes, or a rug, stuff like that. Hopefully that will help. Also maybe up the resolution a little bit on the lighting, just so it smooths out a little bit more and isn't as grainy. But other than that, oh yeah, and adding a bit of smoothing and stuff on your material here, like on the things that should be a bit smoother rather than blockier, could just really soften everything up a little bit more. But so far, yeah, that's really good. It's a good start. Hopefully those things do help. Okay, now we've got Helveras, my project this weekend, trying to make sand like with Molecular plugin. Went with rigid bodies instead. What is the best way to make realistic sand? Okay. Now, I'm probably not the best person to ask about what the best way is to make realistic sand, but I'll give you some critiques or ideas. So probably just making the grains a bit smaller and having a lot more of them. Possibly even adding some more color variation in the sand too. But in terms of the actual scene, you've got a nice composition here. You could possibly make it a bit more interesting by having it slightly to the side and a few other objects on the table. I like the blurred depth of field background. I like the use of the HDRI and the imperfections on the reflections, as well as the model itself. Consider also adding motion blur into your animation, just so it becomes a bit smoother, but definitely making the grains of sand a bit smaller. Really nice color choices, and also possibly if you are using any sort of lights, just give them a slight color. I don't know if this is just a white light or not. I feel like you're just using the HDRI possibly, but just adding a little bit more color to your lights can add to it. Maybe something for in the future, and also the use of bloom too, just to get a bit more shine on some of these highlighted areas here, can really add to it. Yeah, hopefully that gives you some sort of direction of things to look at in the future, and yeah, just let me know what you thought. Okay, then we've got Timely Building 3435. Are these materials realistic? Okay, so let's go in. Generally, yeah, I would say these materials are fairly realistic. You've got like the nice little details and stuff going on. Possibly look into though because you don't have much information in the scene, it's really taking away from the realism. So consider putting in an actual ground and then using a HDRI to add more realistic reflections. Also the use of a slightly coloured light or two will really add a bit more warmth and connection in the scene to the environment as well. And also the slight use of bloom can help add some shine and stuff to the model and the render. I would also give a little bit of a tighter crop to this model, but that's only in this case where there isn't anything on the ground or anything yet. So I would be adding in a HDRI and adding in some sort of ground and stuff first before you really critique it much more after this. Alright, and then we've got Big Bad Cat 25, kind of moving home. Can you guys throw some critics on it? Okay, so you uploaded 4 pictures, but I'm just going to look at this one and this one. And so, quite nice composition. Maybe you could just crop it in, or look into different variations of cropping it. It is quite nice as it is, but it could be good just to maybe look at a bit more of a square composition, especially giving probably a bit more room up the top there for the piece. But that's just me. Like, I think you've got a nice use of bloom, nice use of pictures, of people and billboards to get a sense of scale. Nice use of chromatic aberration, I'm pretty sure it is, and then good use of depth of field, good color choices. I would probably add a bit more like dust and stuff in the air, or so you sort of do have some here, but maybe even just a little bit more around the outside here. Maybe grains of dust in the air as well, like little specks. And also maybe upping your resolution slightly, just so it's not as grainy in some of these areas here. And we'll go back to the original one here so I can zoom a bit nicer. And so it's quite a nice model that you have. Good use of textures and everything like that. Yeah, probably just take this in post a little bit and edit it so that there's a little bit less of like the grainier look, just so it smooths out. Maybe it's a little bit crisper and stuff too. And let's just have a look at that other image. Okay, so I think that's just the cropped one of this one. Yeah, possibly also adding in some details in the sky, but I don't think you really need it. I feel like that'd take away from the actual model here. But probably mostly just looking into composition just a little bit more, experimenting with different angles and different ways of lighting, and possibly, yeah, looking into a few more effects just in the sky and stuff to add a bit more depth to it. But and yeah, also probably adding in some rocks just a little bit more in the foreground to add a bit more depth to it, to make it look a bit like bit fuller in terms of the foreground. But that's just me. These are just my thoughts. Hopefully that they can give you some sort of idea of what you could explore in the future for it. But nice work. And now I've got Adizbar. This is the first model I made by myself. What do you think, and how can I improve? Okay, so the first thing I would say, just with composition, is just maybe cutting off the top sections so they're maybe a bit equal to the thickness or the distance between these sides here. But I would probably add just a little bit more thickness to the sides, just have a little bit more of a border and breathing room around it. With your lighting, using some slight coloured lights just to add a bit more realism to it, so even just a slight blue or a slight yellow in some cases, it can just add a better amount of realism and fall off and stuff to the lights. In terms of colour choices too, I think you got some nice simpler, desaturated colours. I do think the colour though is a bit more one-sided over here, so it could be good just to explore some use of colours over on this side, like even possibly swapping this painting with this one, and maybe putting like some coloured things on the boards and stuff and tables here too. I would also look into adding a slight bevel around these sharp edges here so it catches the light a little bit more, as well as looking into the use of bloom so that the lighter areas can shine just that bit more, as well as putting in a HDRI so there's a bit more of a reflection with some of the areas around here, using some more realistic reflections. Definitely look into adding some different objects along this sort of bookcase, just to give a bit of variation to the boxiness, and maybe have some circular or triangular shapes around here. Look into as well the materials for this plant so it looks a bit more like translucent, possibly using subsurface scattering or other materials like that, just to give it a bit more of a see-through kind of look. And I do like the textures and stuff that you've used as well. It's really nice. And possibly also looking into proportions too, where this seat is quite out of proportion with the size of its back and everything too. Like even just looking into modeling a realistic chair, and then you can muck around with the look of it afterwards, but just getting a correct proportion first, as that would make these pillows quite small on the bed if that's the laptop size. Like either this laptop's really big, which it wouldn't really be because these pens are about this size, or these pillows are very small. Like if you think about if you were to lie your head on your laptop, how big the laptop would actually be, it wouldn't be the same size. Just something to think about. But oh yeah, also the UV map on the top of this here, just trying to clean it up a little bit, because you've probably used project from view or something like that, and now it's creating this banding look here. So just fixing up that. Could just even add in what you've sort of done to the side here is having its own having its own material, and possibly adding in like a second blanket, like a throw going over the corner here. That's what a lot of people, like a lot of modelers do, and it just to add that sort of broken up shape of the rectangle. But yeah, and again the UV maps on the rug too, just getting that banding on the side there that you can see probably wasn't intentional. I would look also into the colours of these books, probably even just projecting a UV map of some books and then having just the front cover of a book on the end there. It can really add a lot more realism, as well as your choice of colours too, maybe thinking about what each book could actually have in there just for a moment and then colouring it accordingly. Definitely use some more reference materials for some of this stuff just to add a bit more realism to it. But yeah, hopefully that helps give you a whole lot of direction of stuff to explore. Now we got DeWood Awesome D1, beginner here, need feedback on this scene. Okay, let's look into it. I love your use of colour with the lights. Maybe just adding a bit more of a blur with these lights by possibly using an area light, just so it has a bit of a blurred look as it goes off into the distance. Consider also your choice of the angle on the light, as this section here would be a focal point in the image, but it's in shadow, so consider maybe either its placement, your composition, or the use of light to be able to place a bit more emphasis on this scene, or even remove this completely and then have a bit more focus on this area here, just because I feel like you've got two major sections going on here in terms of your composition. So just choose one focal point and work on that. And So I do really like the materials and stuff that you've used here, like the slight use of normal maps to shake up the reflections, as well as you've got some really nice models with the windows here. Just maybe be careful of reusing the material, like the texture, over and over again, because it will create the same sort of look, and unless that's what you're going for, sometimes it can just be a bit distracting and repetitive. You've got some really nice pillows and nice little streaks of stuff going on in here, so that's really good too. And nice use of normal maps and textures on the ground as well. But definitely then I would just be looking into what your focal point is and composing a picture around that. So you could definitely bring it on over here and like crop it something like that or something like that, and then just having a bit more of an intense light on there just to light it up, having a bit more contrast, or bringing it over here and just having it a little bit tighter on there, probably a little bit more front on, maybe stuff on the bed a bit more, and then having a bit more of an interesting background too, as this kind of looks a bit like post-apocalyptic yellow and stuff like that. So just looking into that sort of stuff, as well as how you can see the reflection here of the rest of the room. Still model stuff in the rest of that room there so it can reflect. Think of every reflection how it needs to show whatever is it's reflecting. Yeah, hopefully that helps give some more detail. Now we got Aggie Wells. How is it? Okay, let's have a look. First thing, it's just quite dark, so I'm going to come into here and paste that in, and just in curves just put up the lighting just a little bit more so I can see it. And now the next thing I would say is actually cropping it just a little bit tighter to get rid of some of the unnecessary stuff and bring a bit more focus in to the actual focal point of the anvil and the hammer. I would say as well to give a little bit more room up the top and possibly down the bottom too, just of like breathing room, so not cropping it so tight on the top there. And this point of the anvil is starting to blend in with the back rocks here, so I would be using lighting, even like changing and adjusting colors slightly so that you can show the silhouette of this anvil a whole lot more. And yeah, just because it's starting to blend in there, so maybe having a bit more of a shadow on this rock or changing the color of the rock slightly. In terms of the rock too, the anvil, I feel like there's this sort of rusty look, or the red look over it. I feel like you could maybe make some adjustments to it to make it go a little bit more around the edges, or just maybe having it a little bit less intense, because it makes it look in a strange sort of magical sense, but not really with that red, because you do have this blue here. I would maybe look into adjusting the blue slightly, because this is more just my personal preference, because I feel like that blue isn't as magical as what you want it to be. So I'm just gonna maybe go in and just like a lighter blue, or you can go like a really light blue like this. Just looking into the different colors like that. Something maybe more like that. That's just how I'd go with it. I'd also look into UV maps for these rocks, just because of the slight stretching and also the resolution of the image that you're using, as I feel like it's a bit too low resolution. I feel like you're using a slightly colored light for the light source, which is really nice. It does add a little bit more warmth, but I would also consider maybe using a secondary light coming from another angle just to light up some of these darker areas. And it'll be a different color, maybe like a dark blue or something too. I'd up the resolution as well on this sort of lighting so it's not as grainy. Possibly even adding a point light in slightly in front of it, just to have a bit more control over the look of the light of that. And a bit more bevel around some of these edges here too, just so it can be a bit smoother and catch the light in different ways. And also adding in a HDRI map so that there can be a bit more interesting reflections coming up on these metallic pieces. Also looking into having some small rocks around the base of this anvil, just to break up this sort of strong edge going on here, so that it can look a bit more like it's actually in the scene and lying down in there. Those are the sort of things that I'd be saying just in the beginning right now with this piece, just to give you a bit more direction in where things can go. But hopefully that really helps give something to you. Alright, now we've got a Vipulth Sniper. Finally, what do you think of this? So you've uploaded a few pictures, but I'm just going to look at this main one here. First thing I would say is the composition is just a bit too tight, so giving a little bit more room around the edges of your models, just so you can let it breathe just that little bit more. I do really like the composition though of the models that you've got here. I feel like just up in here though, something is a little bit empty, so maybe just having maybe possibly adjusting the composition of each model a bit more precisely to make sure it's balanced in the eye. And I think that composition is going to be the thing that you're going to explore a whole lot with this. And so maybe even just having like little specks of like light or something just sprayed out a little bit around the room to help balance the composition. In terms of modeling, I do like maybe your slight use of HDRI, although I feel like you can smooth this trumpet out a little bit more so it's a little bit smoother, and maybe using or exploring different HDRIs to get different looks. But yeah, in terms of modeling, consider the use of a bevel on some of these edges so it can catch the light in a bit more of an interesting way. Use a slightly coloured light in your lights too, like of a slight yellow, or even having two lights, one of a yellow and one of a slight blue or something like that, to give a bit more realism to the choice in lighting, like how things have been sprayed out, because no light really is pure white. I'll possibly look into the different materials of this mug, as it looks like it's a metallic mug rather than probably a ceramic mug, which is maybe what you're going for. Possibly also look into the modelling of both this shoe and the pig, as I feel like the ears and maybe even the tail, as well as the overall shape of this shoe, might not be exactly what you're going for originally. So possibly use some reference materials just to help sharpen up the silhouettes, and maybe even look into some tutorials just of different ways to make these certain sort of shapes. And possibly even too looking into normal maps just to capture the light in slightly different ways. I feel like you might have it here, but it's hard to see because the resolution of the image is quite low. But overall, really nice piece. Hopefully this just gives you some things to look into and explore, and yeah, and then it helps you out your future projects. Now we've got Waste Development 198. Any tips for realism on this for my potato? Check reference image. Okay, so that's your image, and then that's a reference. So we got the reference, then your image. Alright. So it looks like, is this, yeah, so this still needs a few more details, like the little details on the front circular section. So what I'm going to actually say is that this isn't meant to be a copy of that first one, and we're just going to go from there, looking into some little things to look into. Alright, so the first thing I would check out is your composition, just making sure that you have maybe a few more trees around hiding the fence just that little bit more. It'll create a bit more of an architectural look rather than just one tree over here. Be a bit more specific about the placement of your gate so it actually connects up with the fence, as well as your windows, making sure that they connect on with the walls that it should be connected on. Also look into the use of UV maps, because at the moment you probably did a project from view and then that's where you're getting all this banding down the bottom here. Consider why, like, what this sort of fence is. It feels like that was unintentional. Either if it was, it's just not really working probably as strongly as what you think. Think also about more specifically the placement of your models, as this compared to this one in here isn't fully down into the floor. So just being a bit more particular about where you're placing every little piece. Now it looks like you are using a HDRI map in the background, but I would also just replace that HDRI, like I would keep the HDRI in there but replace this background with an image or rendering more things out. I would shrink down as well this sort of dirt so it becomes a bit more in proportion with the actual building, and look into minimizing the repetition of the textures so that it doesn't look like it's perfectly repeating. It can just be by like adding things over the top of it to break up that sort of repetition a little bit more. And yeah, looking into things like bloom too to make things a little bit shinier too, like the color choices. But I think there's a lot of things that I've already said to you, and I think that you should start applying some of those things, and then we can look at it again and see what we can improve. But yeah, hopefully that helps. Right, now we got Jerry D 2000. Any tips to improve the lighting of my scene? I feel like it might be a bit too dark and the back wall appears too flat. Any advice is appreciated. So yeah, so I would agree that it is quite dark. So I'm going to paste it in here, and then I'm going to, just in curves, just brighten it up a little bit more like this. And now I would actually probably crop it a little bit tighter. Maybe like maybe like that, just to bring a bit more focus to this character here and some of the things that it's reflecting. I will just see if I can do any. Yep, here we go, here's some bloom. Okay, I don't know, this is actually the first time I've been using this. Yeah, so I'd be I would just be looking into adding some bloom, especially to this character here, just to make it a little bit more shiny around the person, and then also other little areas around here too. I would consider not using a white light, give it some color, like especially because of this blue light here, probably the contrast or another color. It's like a light yellow or a light red even, just because it looks like it's maybe in a like robotics place or something like that. And I would up the resolution of your lighting too, so it's a bit smoother around everywhere. You can use to, if we just have a look, yeah, we can use slightly colored, like an angled lights to give a bit more shadow to this wall and give a little bit more roundness, because we'll have a reference point of one side and the other side, just giving some harsher angles and stuff with everything. And I would probably just with these little rocks here, maybe give some more variation to them, some cracks, some different sizes, and possibly up or adjust the colors and the normal maps and stuff on them to be a bit more intense, maybe a bit more refined, because I feel like they're a bit distracting down there, being so blocky compared to everything else. I just feel like they could maybe be toned down slightly. Maybe even if we go into this and then turn that down, yeah, just a little bit more, just so it's a bit more natural and stuff. Yeah, that's probably what I'm going to say about that so far. Just to try and improve the lighting. Now, I did change a lot of things in there from your original image, but hopefully it just gives you some things to think about, and probably also thinking about the angle of your light to try and get a little bit light up on that wall too. But there's a lot of things that you can look into with this, and hopefully, yeah, that gives you some stuff just to explore. Cheers. Now we've got the blue world. I've done a few feedback things with this person. They're good. Alright, do you want some bread, little baby dragon? Here is some semi-realistic and cartoony styled art with a baby dragon trying to sell some bread. Okay. Alright, let's open it up. Interesting. Alright. So I would just up the resolution of the image on the ground, just so it doesn't look so blocky and artifacty. And also upping the resolution of the light too, so again it's not so blocky, so we can just get a bit more detail in there. I would probably add a little bit more resolution too to the model here, so having a bit more polygons and stuff, just so we can smooth it out. I would choose to smooth the model just a little bit more, because then it can look nice and round. And your composition is definitely getting better. Maybe just thinking about the position of your lighting. So maybe having the light a little bit up higher so we don't have this big shadow down the ground, and possibly bringing it more in front of the character, and then having another light in the behind them, just to light up maybe the tops of their hair a little bit more. Give a bit more variation in height as well with this grass. I do like the variation of colour, but I think that by adding a little bit more height and maybe size to certain tufts, it'll give it a little bit more realism and stuff too. But yeah, no, nice work. Hopefully that gives you some things to look into. Now we got Andrew Zox. Help me make this better. Okay, let's open it up. Okay, so I'm assuming that this is like the water coming up and down. So I would look into the color of this water a little bit more. Also make sure that it goes right to the edge, as it's not going on over here. Looking into shaders too would be good, to have this sort of like the white like foam sort of area on the side there, as well as making it look more transparent. There's it could be caustics, or there's like the translucency where it'll get thicker the deeper you look into it, just so there's a nice transition of transparency up into the sand. That also means probably modeling some extra stuff onto this bit of sand here, like little bits of rocks, maybe a little branch and stuff, giving a little bit more realism to the scene. And I would probably look into a bit more color variation in your sand too, as it looks a bit more like dough at the moment. And so yeah, just looking into the texture that you're using for that. I would use a HDRI to get a bit more interesting reflections on your glass, as well as, again, probably looking into caustics and stuff. I'm pretty sure it is, remind me if it isn't, but of how the shape of the bottle is going to bend the light, and it'll give some variation to the butterfly, the way it looks, because it's like a glass that's slightly curved, so it's going to curve the light slightly. Add a bit of a bevel as well into this cork, just so it can capture the light on that harsher edge just a little bit more. And then with the butterfly, maybe changing its angle a little bit more and flying around in like even a figure 8 style shape, rather than in the one spot. and also how it's clipping through in one section here, right at that start bit. Just making sure that it doesn't clip through the bottle itself. Also give this bottle some actual thickness too. It looks like it's just one plane all the way through. Make sure it actually does have some thickness, especially when you're getting into the reflection of the light. And definitely looking into composition too. Just that little bit more, I think just exploring with the angle of the camera and stuff like that can really add to the whole scene itself. Maybe having it a bit more flat, and so then you can have the ability to see the stuff in the background, like other little islands and stuff too. But yeah, no, that's really good. Hopefully that gives you a bit of direction for your future. Okay, then we got Olho Metro. Here it is with resolution, because I think I saw you upload another one that was a bit lower resolution. Nice. Okay, so like I was saying to you the other day, probably again just upping the light just that little bit more, just so we can see the colors just that little bit more. And I would start to consider the background too, maybe even getting a photo of your room or something like that with similar lighting and just blurring it as the background. I think too, just slightly upping the resolution of your light just so it can be a little bit smoother, and possibly too adding a bit more of a bevel around the edges of these harsher edges, just so they can all capture the light just a little bit more. Also probably just giving a bit more of a translucency to the Lego models. As you might know, possibly with Lego, how they can shine through light just slightly. It's just something to look into. But I do like your use of reflections, like that global illumination. And if these are reflective too, I'd be using a bit more of a HDRI map around. And don't forget to take it into post and maybe adjust the saturation of things. I just feel like as well, you could probably, if I just adjust some stuff, just adjusting the colors of individual colors so that there's a bit more balance around, but it might be hard to see just how, like, it's just something to consider in the future. And also use depth of field just to blur the front and background, and consider the angle of your camera too, just so that we can position some of these Lego models in like a nice sort of sweeping way rather than just a hill right in front of us. But that'll come with time and practice, just exploring different angles. I do like, since last time, the blocks seem to have fallen a bit more realistically, which is really good. Alright, hopefully that sort of stuff gives you some direction to look into. Now I've got electric accordion, Tyros 1 satellite. Been teaching myself Blender for a year and would love some feedback on where I can improve. Okay, so it's a very nice model and stuff that you've got going on. We've got nice use of bloom and nice details. I would consider maybe just adding some slight color to these lights, even though it might come off white. Maybe just making it slightly blue or slightly yellow or something like that, and just add a little bit more realism to the scene. I like the slight gradient as well that you've got from back here, but do think as well about the background that you're putting this into, and if you wanted any more details with it, just like little bits of stars or space dust or something like that. I feel also like your composition is quite tight from in vertically, like this area here is quite nice, especially because I'm assuming it's in space, so it's good to have that much more area around the side. But I think you could have just a bit more room on the top and bottom. I feel like you've really shown this model well, but also consider if we're using probably one light here that I think it might be white, so change the color of that light slightly, but also adding a secondary colored light coming from this angle to fill up this area here. Could even just be like a really dark blue. And I feel like you could look into reflections a little bit more with some of these areas here, and through the use of a HDRI map can really get some nice reflections going with the piece. Yeah. Alright, well that's probably all I'm going to say about your piece, but yeah, it's very nice. I think it's just looking into some of those other things that aren't as much modeling and more just lighting and rendering for you right now, but nice. Okay, now we got Papaya Man. It's my first render. Kind of looks like trash. Can you give me some feedback? Alright. So if like I was to be honest, the render is quite nice. I think it's more just about looking into little things of modeling and mostly composition and lighting. So if we just have a look at the model first, so I'd probably just add a little bit more of a bevel to these harsher edges around the model, just so it catches the light a little bit more around around its edges. And this sort of band up here, I think that looks pretty nice. Maybe even explore having it a bit thinner as well. Maybe it's just proportions, like maybe this area not being so thick, as in like so wide, but it's up to you about what your references are and stuff too. And then we've got these sort of, I'm not exactly sure what they are, maybe like bushes or gemstones, but maybe just have a bit more of a think about what you're doing with these, and especially in terms of placement. So when I'm placing stuff like this, where I'm just going to call them rocks, when I'm placing stuff, I usually think of maybe like there's two major things with it, and they're both sort of the same thing, is placing the rocks at the base of things or in the creases of things, or having, say, a big lump of, say, a rock there and then having the smaller versions around its edges. It's a common art thing, but pretty much so kind of like what you're doing here with this one is you're placing it at the base of the windmill sort of thing. You're placing it around here, and don't just do one at every little thing, like try and place it naturally, because that's where things go in nature. Is you'll see with grass how grass tends to if you're in like in a like metropolitan area or whatever, at the corners of things or in the cracks of cement, grass will come out. And same with how like near a fence, grass tends to be thicker at the base of the fence than out in the normal areas. And same with rocks, how through the use of like wind and water, they'll be collecting at the edges of like, you know, walls and stuff like that. Same with dust and everything too. Then you look into the placement of when people put down plants and stuff, like potted plants, they always have one big one and then two smaller ones where one is slightly larger than the other one, to create a three-layered sort of thing. Just gets it a bit more aesthetic. So I'd just be looking into the placement of these, as well as placing, this would be like the major focus of the shot, not placing it directly right in the middle. I'd be doing looking into the rule of thirds. So basically the rule of thirds is you break this up vertically in thirds and then horizontally in thirds, and then there's now 4 marker points for the piece. And so I would put this, the base of it, in this like corner here, and then it'll probably come up a little bit more here, and then I would probably place a bunch of rocks down here as a bit more of a prominent feature in this 4th corner, and then maybe even the sun in the other 4th corner shining down. and it'll create a nice balanced look. And then from there you'll at least have something to work off, where you might want to just move the windmill in slightly or move the sun down into the middle a bit more, stuff like that. But I would basically just consider not having it so directly in the middle, especially being so small. So if I was to crop it myself, I'll just be cropping it just something like this, whereas just it's now a major focus of the image, but it's just slightly off center. But then this area here pulls it back into the center, like it makes the image balanced still. Same with the hill coming slightly up. But that's just me, like it depends on your eye and how it makes you feel. And another part of it too is just maybe considering having a softer area light for when you're shining on this, so it blurs out just that little bit more. And the use of stuff in the foreground too, like extra hills in the background to give a bit more depth, and then the use of depth of field just to blur those two out a little bit more and have a bit more focus on this. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, there's a lot of information there, there's stuff for you to look into. Alright, now we got biscuity, tasty hourglass I made. Anything more I can do in this scene to make it look more realistic? Okay, what I'm actually going to do is just brighten it up just a little bit more. So I'm going to use curves, brighten it up, just so that I can have a bit more of a focus on it. I would also probably tighten the crop just a bit more. If anything, I would give a bit more room to the sides. But since this is all I've got, I'm going to just make it a little bit tighter. And now I like your use of the HDRI. I think that you've got a nice use of textures and the way that it's lit. I feel like you could possibly be using a white light there. I would just change the color of that just to a slight yellow. I'll just make it a bit more realistic. But yeah, definitely the textures are nice. That sort of sand look is quite nice. Maybe just giving it a bit more of a spray down the bottom and having a bit like just a bit more of a motion blur possibly. But I think definitely a bit more of a spray as it comes down the bottom, so it's not as strict of a line. And there is a slight curve in the line, which I would say is from the glass. But yeah, I'm just thinking maybe a slighter spray there. Possibly just a little bit more resolution on this area here in terms of the polygons, just because it's slightly jagged just in some of these sections here. And yeah, honestly, like I'd probably just start off with some of those things first. And then see where you go from there. Maybe giving it a bit more context too by adding a few more objects in the scene rather than it just being the singular hourglass, but that's just me. And yeah, maybe also giving a secondary light from the other side of just a lower intensity just to fill up some of these other areas. Maybe just over like a dark green or something like that, as if it's reflecting off something and bouncing back. But yeah, hopefully that helps. Cool. Now we've got PS5 Peroni. Alright. I had a beer this morning. I'm not a Peroni though. Okay, so nice use of depth of field, although I think that you could probably keep the top of this one in focus just because it's the one in the front. It's probably just a bit too intense with the depth of field on this front one. Nice little folds and stuff of the sticker, but I think try and make it not repeat on this other bottle here, just because then I can instantly see that it's repeating there. And I feel like you're probably just using area lights. Sorry. You're probably just using area lights, and I feel like you should incorporate HDRIs as well in this, just so it has a bit more of an interesting reflection going around. I do like the condensation and stuff that you've got going too, and I do like the different light sources. I feel like it's a little bit bland around with just the ice cubes and the bottle caps. Maybe just having maybe some bubbles or some even like misty, like smokier effects or something, like the coldness of the air or something in the air could really add to it, especially the making these like look cold. And I think that just by making some little adjustments to the placement of these, as well as the other misty like dry ice look, can help with the composition too, as I feel like it's quite off balance. Like this is a bit too heavy, while these are going just the opposite way and creating a lot of weight in the image over here. I feel like you could possibly move this one out to face the other angle, then have this a little bit more upright. But I just maybe look into reference images about what other people have done and work around a sort of different composition and explore different ways and get your eyes used to looking at what could work best. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Alright, now we've got Holland's feedback. How can I improve the 3-point lighting for this model? Need feedback. Okay, so it's sort of hard for me to really pick up on what the lighting setup is, and when I opened up this, it had the white background. So what I'm going to do is just put it in, and then I'm going to put in a background like this, just so I can see it a bit better. And first thing I would just say is give a little bit more room around the model for composition, just have a little bit more breathing room up the top. And now if we look into the lighting, leg's going dead. Okay, so if we look into the lighting, we've got the sort of it looks like the rim light. Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain 3-point lighting to you rather than trying to break down what this is going on here. So you want 3 lights. We've got the key light, the fill light, and then the rim light, basically. We'll start off with the key light first. So if we were to look at if the key light was coming from this angle here, so maybe we're getting like it's coming up this way, seeing her face and her legs there. Now I would color that light slightly, so giving it a slight yellow tinge and stuff to it, or green or blue or whatever the sort of look you're going for. Then that means that all this area, all this area over here is now in darkness, basically. So now we want to fill that up by using the fill light. And so we would have another light coming from this angle. It's usually going to be about half the intensity of the key light, because we don't want it to be the focus. It's not the focus, it's just lighting up the rest of that area so that it's still got some detail in there. Now let's say if this one's slightly yellow, I'd maybe give this one a slight blue or a slight green look. But see, now what happens is the edge of this is going to be quite dark. The edges up around here and stuff too are probably going to be quite dark, especially if there's a black background. So we have the rim light, or sometimes they call it the hair light, because if you were doing portraiture, it'd be behind the person and it'd be lighting up the hair, so it doesn't blend into the background. And so it's usually nearly behind the character, and I say nearly behind as if it's going to be on a slight angle, so then it can catch the rim of the model. and it will probably be more intense than the key light, or about the same, just so it can be quite bright and shine around. And now basically I don't think too exactly about where it's going to be. I kind of just look at which area do I want to show the edges of a whole lot more. Like, let's say you've got this character here, but like these edges up here are quite dark because the key light just didn't really get to it just enough. So then I would place the rim light to capture that area there. But if the fill light was really shocking and it was really bad on these areas here, I would probably place maybe even 2 rim lights to capture both those areas there. Now you just have to be careful though as well, because of how it can affect the ground. So just thinking about the angles and the types of lights that you're using. Because I do all my stuff in Unity, I really just use point lights, spotlights and directional lights. It doesn't, I use the built-in project thing, and so I don't use area lights in mine. But yeah, it's just thinking even using 2 or even 3 point lights to create the rim light. Because don't think that it just needs to be 3 lights and that's the maximum. Think about why they're there rather than like how many there are, because then you know why you're doing what you're doing rather than just randomly putting in the lights where that you think they should go. But yeah, hopefully that helps break everything down for you. Alright, now we got Conqueror, insert title. Alright, I need some feedback. Okay, so I might just look into brightening this scene up. Oh, hang on, I'm going to paste that in. Just going to brighten it up just a little bit more, just so I can see it just a little bit better. I do like the rays and stuff that you've got here and the different coloured lights. And alright, so we've got a teddy bear and then what's this, like a cup or something over here. Alright, so what I would actually say is, I feel like your image is lacking focus. Because, and that's more just because of your composition. So I would actually say, if you were to compose the image, maybe, let's just see, maybe something a bit more like this, where now we've got the teddy bear in the bottom like corner, and then we've got this sort of, these lines coming down here too. It brings a bit more attention on the bear, rather than with this, the bear, yes, it's in the middle, but we're more thinking about this whole area here. If we were to go in a different direction, we can say crop the image like this. And now, as much as we're acknowledging the teddy bear and maybe this line here, we're more focused on this blue area back here. And so it's creating a different story. So I'd just be thinking about your composition a whole lot more with everything that's going on in here. Possibly adding in a bit more of an interesting roof section here, like I think this is the sky coming in. And adding in a bit more of a bevel on the harsher edges of this model here, just so it catches the light in a bit more of an interesting way. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that, but hopefully that gives you some sort of direction with where you could go with all of this. Alright, now we've got another one by, I think that was there was another person here back here called PS5. Alright, so let's have a look. Let's open it up. Okay, so I do like this composition. It is quite tight. I feel like maybe just the position of the tree could be slightly adjusted, maybe by moving it slightly closer to the outside edge. But that's just me, but I do like this composition. And I like the use of colours. Maybe you could just brighten it up just slightly, just like the littlest bit. And I like your use of different coloured lights. I feel like that's really giving some nice shape and stuff to the model. And also make sure that this these notes are actually placed on the model and not just floating off, because there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of room between that model and the note. I think though that, okay, so I'm only honestly just realizing that this is like a Twitch logo, so possibly giving this a bit more of an emission texture. Consider the placement of the light too, and how this tree is breaking up its silhouette. So I'd be moving that tree a little bit more so that like we can see it a bit more obviously, and just position the lighting so that it's a much more well lit, and really showing that silhouette a whole lot more. Yeah, also look into bloom too, just to make sure some of these areas are a bit brighter. And I think that, yeah, possibly your lights might be a little bit too on the side. If you bring them a little bit more in front of the model, then it will light up everything just a little bit more like traditionally, and make the thing that you want to focus on the actual focus, because this area is the most in shadow out of the whole area. Like this gold, the side here, and the tree, and even the ground here is lighter than the thing that you're trying to focus on. So it's just something to look into for your future works. But yeah, nice. Alright, now we've got It's Penguin Craft. How can I make this forest more photorealistic? Okay, so I would be looking into your composition a bit more, so making sure that there's a bit more room up on the top of the mountain here. Probably cut off a whole load of this bottom bit too. Look into the types of colors of trees, and look into references, so you have a more realistic color palette and color choices, as well as maybe even a whole lot more variation in the color of the trees too. Look into mountains in the background to give a bit more depth to this scene, as well as maybe some bigger trees and mountains in the front to give a bit more of a sense of scale, as well through the use of depth of field, so then we can have a bit more of a focus. I would also look into considering how a person probably has taken this realistically in a landscape, how they would have taken the photo, because I doubt that many people would have taken photos sort of like this. Like there's nothing truly interesting in the actual image. So considering what makes an interesting mountain landscape, and looking into photos already made and basically just recreating that. I would also look into how you've lit the scene using a slightly coloured light, maybe of a light yellow, which will make a bit more of a realistic sunlight coming through. And then possibly to making it a bit softer so there's not as harsh shadows. Yeah, hopefully that gives you some tips to look into. Okay, then we've got FMMC6. How realistic is it on a 1 to 10 scale? Okay, also the first thing I would say is that I'm not going to really rate it, but I think that composition wise, you just need to bring the chair back a little bit more. Sorry, not the chair, the camera, just so that we can see a little bit more of this ground of the table here. As if you were to take this photo, you probably wouldn't have it cropped like this on here. You would have it a bit further back to see a bit more of the scene. And now I also think adding a bit more of a bevel around the edge of this table, just so it can catch the light in a bit more of an interesting way, especially on the edge. And also looking into the proportion of your models too, as like this table is quite thick. I would probably assume that it'd be a bit thinner if it was a realistic table, just because of things like movement and also aesthetically. And also looking into how the textures repeat downwards over the side of the table, because they don't actually line up at the moment either. I do like the curtains and stuff that you've used too. I like the materials that you've got on them and the curtain rods, and I like the background hill texture that you've got in there. I think that this light is quite low. As soon as you stand up, you'd headbutt it. So make it up a little bit higher, maybe even putting the ceiling up slightly or making it a bit smaller and a bit more raised. And I think that the chair can be a bit more consistent in terms of the height of the lounges and cushions. Maybe even adjusting the material so it's a little bit more shiny, and adding in a few more creases and stuff, and adding some pillows in, like adding a few more details on the table. I would also put in a slightly coloured light, so it's not a white light, so just a slight yellow. It'll add a bit more realism to the room. But yeah, like, it's not too bad, but it's good. Like, there's a few things that you just need to think about, and hopefully all that stuff that I said just gives you a bit more direction with where you should go. Alright, now we've got why bolt. My first non-test render. What can I do to improve it? Okay, so the first thing I would do is actually probably cropping it a bit tighter, just around the top and bottom, just slightly on the bottom, but a bit more on the top, just so we can focus a little bit more on this anvil. Maybe making the texture a little bit less intense in terms of the normal map, so it can be a bit smoother, but that's sort of down to your aesthetic. And I would use a slightly coloured light. I feel like you sort of are, but just because this white is quite intense, maybe giving it a slight yellow. Also, consider the placement of your lights to just make sure that you're showing the areas that you want to show, as I feel like this sort of reflection down here could be better to be placed up here, but I feel like it'd be better to actually place in a HDRI to get some other interesting reflections too, and then think about how you're placing these sort of lights to capture, especially with those reflections. I would also add in some bloom too, so that it's shinier a bit in some areas, like as in like the light will pop off a little bit more. And possibly just thinking too about with the ground, maybe even adding a ground texture and some grass, and looking into how you position the camera too, to try and show the strengths of the model as much as you can. It is a quite nice one here, but maybe consider, if you're keeping this camera view, looking into the field of view, so that you might want to like crush it or warp it out a little bit more, and just experiment with which one you think looks best. But yeah, hopefully that helps give some advice for you. Alright, now we got Ragosh, Grant Abbott's Well. Would love to get some feedback. Okay, so let's have a look-see. So first thing I would say is trying to maybe even put a beam above these shingles so that they can connect under the beam, and it'll just give a bit more of a flushed look, and look a bit cleaner. In terms of the render, maybe just consider as well adding in slight bloom just so it shines a little bit more. Look into your proportions too, as this handle is quite small for what would be cranked over and over again. But the actual models itself, they do look really nice, like nice color choices. Maybe just some slight variation with the lightness of this one, maybe just making it a slight bit darker. Also, I feel like you might have caught one of these polygons while you were coloring these things, and so it's like the same color as them, so maybe just looking into that. Maybe also just giving a little bit more resolution or thought even to the positioning and like how these rocks were placed together, just so they're not as maybe sharp and lower resolution. Maybe just giving the bigger ones a little bit more resolution. And also look into the positioning of your model or the angle of the camera, as I feel like this is quite straight on. I feel like it would look much better if it was slightly rotated. And I feel like you can crop this a little bit tighter, especially on this edge, and look into the use of field of view, so that you might want to make the well look a bit more warped to the camera, or crushing it a little bit more, just mucking around with the field of view of the camera, as well as looking into the slight angles of your lights, maybe having two different lights of different colors, so that they can capture the roundness of the model a little bit more. Alright, now we've got Simon 3D, Seed of Life. So let's open it up, let's have a look. I'm going to actually bring this into GIMP, and I'm going to brighten it up just a little bit, just so I can see it a bit more. Okay, so I like you've got a bit of bloom, I like the materials and the sort of cracks and stuff that you've got here. I do like the use of the HDRI, but I feel like you should actually still keep the HDRI in, but replace it with an image that's of higher resolution. I like the kind of volumetric lighting and stuff that you've got here, as well as the general composition. You could possibly move the person into a bit more of the front, as well as the car, and then crop it just that little bit tighter, and then maybe use the field of view to make it give a bit more of an illusion of distance. And I feel like maybe just looking into the slight color variations of the light that's coming out of this, just to maybe give it a bit more realism and stuff, but so far it's looking really nice. I'd consider depth of field too, just to add a little bit more of a sense of scale, maybe even a vignette to drag us into the scene just that slight bit more. But overall, yeah, that's a really nice render. Nice work. Alright, and then we've got Zeno's music. You think it's worth to finish this render? I tried multiple textures and lighting and I'm confused which one is best. Really need some advice. Okay, so the real question you should ask yourself is, where is this going to go if you want to finish this? Because that's going to determine your texture and lighting. So I would say that this one is quite bland, in the sense that this is more just showing the model. This one's a bit more interesting, but I think that the lighting is sort of making it a bit too much going on with the eyes, and so it's hard to break it apart which one it is. Again, I would say this is sort of doing the same thing. I do like this one. I feel like I can sort of see that sort of shine coming out, as if it's creating a sort of energy, as well as I think the eyes are a little bit more obvious in this section. And I feel like this one just isn't cropped very well. I do like this one, but I feel like the colors might just need some adjustment, just to make it a bit more brighter and a bit more intense. And so I would look into also a HDRI to add a bit more reflection to everything, and it might make it a bit more interesting, as well as adding some bloom to make things a little bit more shiny, and spray that light out a little bit more. But yeah, mostly just looking into the different variations of colors and stuff too. So my guess would be this one, just because it's also my aesthetic too. I really like that sort of style of a look. Maybe just cropping it just a little bit tighter on this side, and maybe the sides too, just to get it in a really nice amount of breathing room on the top, bottom and everything there. But yeah, hopefully that gives some advice for you. Now we've got Novandora. How can I make this look more realistic? Okay, so first thing is considering why a person would take this photo. So we do have this sort of sword here, but I feel like it's so thin and the light isn't really catching it in the right direction that a person wouldn't choose this angle to take this photo. So I would be thinking that there'd be maybe a light behind you looking at it, and so now it'll be nice and shiny and bright. But also I think that you would have a probably lower angle, so that it can, and a bit more closer, so that when we look at this sword, it can be a bit more of a prominent part of the image. I would even crop it a whole lot more tighter to this sword, and then adding some bloom to make it shine a little bit more. and then using depth of field to blur the mountains behind it so it can become a major focus. Now, to make it as well a bit more realistic, having more realistic shadows for each bit of grass, having probably a bit more grass overall everywhere rather than just the completely flat sort of texture that we've got here. And looking into the variations of lighting, so having that slightly yellow light coming down, but then also maybe a slightly blue light to capture some of the shadows and lighten them up. Also looking into the types of textures that you've got here by adding a bit more resolution and normal map so it's not as stretched. Putting in a skybox, or a HDRI, so that there's more realistic shadows going everywhere. Maybe even adjusting some of the colors so they're a little bit less saturated and less orange in these sort of areas, and possibly a bit of ambient occlusion so there's a bit more shadows in some of these under areas here. Yeah, hopefully that sort of helps, give some tips. Cheers. Alright, now we've got ZZ Epic Sniper 303 ZZ. Work in progress. Can I get some critique on this model I'm working on? Alright, let's have a look. So when you're lighting it, use a slightly coloured light, like probably a slight yellow, and then because of this bottom area here too, going into the darkness, use a slightly other coloured light of half intensity of like blue, just to give a bit more roundness to the whole model. It'll make it look a whole lot better and it's better to judge. But if we go into the details, for this, I'd still probably add in just a slight bit of thickness and maybe a bevel just on the edges so it can catch the light a little bit more. And looking into a bevel on all these harsher edges here, just so I can add a little bit more realism. Sorry, I was going to burp, but it wasn't. I would just sort of like look into bevels mostly with a lot of these little things, just making sure there's bevels, making sure there's like the little bits of like nuts and bolts and stuff around, like little seals, like those little extra details. Possibly adding cables if there are any cables around, because that can give it a more natural, interesting look. But definitely beveling some of these areas and adding those tinier details that might end up just being like a little dot in some cases, but it'll add that extra detail and add so much more realism to it. But yeah, I think that it's coming along really well. You've got like a nice sense of the sort of design and proportion and stuff of things, but I feel like it's just not completely finished yet to be able to give major advice and stuff on it, especially because of not having materials and stuff on there and having the reflectivity and putting in a HDRI to give it all nice reflections yet. So it's still a work in progress, but yeah, hopefully that helps though, just give a bit of direction. Now lastly, we've got accomplished code 961, trying to learn bloom in cycles, also fluid and rigid bodies. Okay. Nice. Okay, so trying to make sure there's maybe even a little bit more bloom around the edges here, but also still light up the scene so that you can see this stalk a little bit more, because it's quite in darkness at the moment. And use a slightly coloured light, don't just use the pure white light, like even just a slight yellow can really add to it. Really nice effect that you've got there. Also probably consider using a HDRI to add a little bit more detail to some of the reflections, and maybe a background image, just so that we can capture some more detail. Use motion blur too, just to smooth everything out a little bit more. But no, yeah, like that's nice. It's it's a good piece. I can definitely see it's still an experiment, but I think you came out with a really interesting thing here. So nice work. Alright, and that's it for everybody. Hopefully that helps the people that I've helped today, and yeah,